Some rain last night, a continuation this morning. We set out at the usual time and proceeded on the course of last night to the commencement of a blue clay bluff of 180 or 190 feet high on the LS. Those bluffs appear to have been lately on fire, and at this time are too hot for a man to bear his hand in the earth at any depth. Great appearance of coal, an immense quantity of cobalt, or a crystallized substance which answers its description, is on the face of the bluff. Great quantities of a kind of berry resembling a currant, except double the size, and grows on a bush like a privet, and the size of a damson, deliciously flavored, and makes delightful tarts. This fruit is now ripe. I took my servant and a French boy, and walked on shore, killed 2 buck elks and a fawn, and intercepted the boat, and had all the meat butchered and in by sunset, at which time it began to rain, and rained hard. Captain Lewis and myself walked out and got very wet. A cloudy, rainy night. In my absence, the boat passed a small river called by the Indians White Stone River. This river is about 30 yards wide and runs through a plain and prairie in its whole course in a northerly direction. From the mouth of this creek, in an immense plain, a high hill is situated and appears of a conic form, and by the different nations of Indians in this quarter is supposed to be the residence of devils, that they are in human form with remarkably large heads and about 18 inches high, that they are very watchful and are armed with sharp arrows with which they can kill at a great distance. They are said to kill all persons who are so hardy as to attempt to approach the hill. They state that tradition informs them that many Indians have suffered by those little people, and among others, 3 Maha men fell a sacrifice to their merciless fury not many years since. So much do the Maha, Sioux, Ottos, and other neighboring nations believe this fable that no consideration is sufficient to induce them to approach the hill. This is written, William Clark, Explorer, Friday, August the 24th, 1804.
Hush, little baby, don't say a word.
This is a conspiracy channel.
Welcome to the Hush channel. The thing about tonight's subjects is that they are located near the Canadian border. Really think, what is the one country on earth that is the type of haunted that despite your curiosity, you yourself would not venture into its more scarcely inhabited places? For me, it's Canada. I mean, have y'all heard of the Valley of the Headless Men and the things that have went down there? It makes you strip away man-made borders and look at the territory as a whole before colonization. That's why these particular stories are cataloged with Canada in my head. Same with the stories from Alaska. The region is not lacking in mystery, and its unseen inhabitants have been known to murder in the most brutal of ways that are unexplainable. Roughly 420 to 450 miles, or about 676 to 727 kilometers from the heartland of the Stickmin and Nez Perce, indigenous in what is now north-central Idaho, lies the territory of the Crow Nation, or Apsa Aluga. Their ancestral lands stretched across the Yellowstone River Valley, the Bighorn Mountains, and the plains of present-day Montana and Wyoming. Skilled horsemen, buffalo hunters, and traders, the Crow were known for their independence and resilience. Their spiritual traditions placed heavy importance on fasting, prayer, and vision quests, through which individuals sought guidance from the spirit world. Among the most mysterious and formidable beings within their lore are the Nirumbi, also called the Awakuli, the little people of the Pryor Mountains. The Nirumbi were said to be about 18 inches tall, with nearly round bellies, thick muscular arms and legs, little to no neck, and sharp canine teeth. They were ferocious warriors whose strength was out of proportion to their size. Legends describe them killing full-grown bull elk with ease, ripping flesh with their teeth, and hoisting the elk's head onto their shoulders to carry it away. Their diet was almost entirely meat, and their nature was aggressive and unforgiving. The crow told how they stole children, medicine, food, and tobacco, and how anyone who tried to mock or trick them was eventually destroyed, not just the offender, but their entire family. Out of both fear and reverence, the crow offered tobacco to the Nurumbi at Medicine Rocks each year to appease them. The Nurumbi were not only known to the Crow. Many Plains peoples, from the Sioux to the Omaha, spoke of similar small and dangerous beings, often referred to as stick Indians or devils. The Lewis and Clark expedition recorded visiting a site the Sioux called the Mountain of the Little People in present-day South Dakota. The Sioux described them as 18-inch tall beings with enormous heads, carrying sharp arrows that killed from a great distance. The Omaha, Oto, and Sioux alike avoided the place entirely, saying the Little People destroyed all who drew near. Lakota tradition added that even a band of 350 warriors was nearly annihilated in a nighttime encounter with them. Such stories resonate with the Crow's own belief that the Nurumbi dwelled in the Pryor Mountains, a sacred place marked by petroglyphs said to have been carved by these very beings. For the Crow, however, the Nurumbi were more than bloodthirsty spirits of the wilderness. They were also keepers of vision and destiny. The greatest Crow leader, Chief Plenty Coups, Alik Che Ahush, encountered the Nurumbi twice in visions that would shape not only his life but the fate of his entire nation. At 9 years old, grieving the death of his beloved older brother, he went into the hills to fast and pray. There the dwarf chief of the Nurumbi appeared and brought him into a lodge of spirits, where he was shown the forces of nature, wind, storm, thunder, stars, and moon. Though only a child with no deeds to his name, the dwarf chief proclaimed that he would one day accomplish many great feats and rise to become leader of his people if he cultivated his willpower. From this moment, Plenty Coups understood himself as chosen, and his heart filled with resolve. At 11, he undertook another vision quest, cutting off part of his finger as an offering. Again, the dwarf chief appeared, this time leading him underground into the Pryor Mountains. There, Plenty Coups saw buffalo streams pouring out of the earth, only to vanish, replaced by endless herds of spotted cattle. He saw a great forest leveled by a storm, with only a chickadee surviving. A voice told him that the buffalo, central to Crow survival, would vanish, and white settlers would overrun the land. Yet, like the chickadee, the Crow could endure if they learned to listen, to adapt, and to use their intelligence. This vision was interpreted by the elders as prophecy. It meant that while the way of life on the plains would collapse, the Crow could survive the coming of white settlers if they followed the wisdom of the Nurumbi and the example of the chickadee, to listen, to think, and to endure. History proved the prophecy true. While many tribes were scattered or destroyed in the wake of colonization, the Crow adapted, securing a reservation near their sacred Pryor Mountains, where they remain today. Thus, the Nurumbi were not only destroyers, but also prophets. Their ferocity represented the power of the natural world, unforgiving and dangerous, but their guidance offered survival. For the Crow, to encounter the Nurumbi was to be tested, mocked, threatened, or, in the case of Plenty Coups, granted visions that secured the endurance of his people. When viewed in comparison to other traditions, the Nurumbi are kin to the Shoshone Namerigar, cannibal little people who also wielded poison arrows, and to the Cherokee Rock clan of the Yunwi Tsunsti, who punished disrespect with child stealing and vengeance. Globally, they resemble the dark fae of Europe, the dwarves of Melanesia who were cannibals, and the forest dwarfs of Africa who ambushed hunters with poison darts. Across cultures, little people were not always whimsical tricksters. They could be brutal, violent, and prophetic. The Nurumbi of the Crow Nation embodied this duality in its sharpest form. They were predators, yet they also guided the greatest Crow chief in visions that foretold the end of the old ways and the survival of his people through adaptation. In this, they are both destroyers and midwives of destiny, small in stature but vast in power, carving their warnings into stone, shaping the fate of a nation, and reminding the Crow that survival depends on listening, learning, and respecting the unseen powers of the land. The little people are sometimes described as spirit dwarves, were not only feared within Crow tradition, but also deeply respected for their ability to grant blessings, guidance, and spiritual insight. These insights were not something a person could seek out casually. Most Crow people avoided the Pryor Mountains altogether, believing the area to be inhabited and closely watched by these beings. Still, there were rare instances when an individual would go alone to the Medicine Rocks and fast, removing themselves from distraction and waiting in stillness. If deemed worthy, one of the little people might appear, often not in their true form, but as a lone animal, and through that encounter, provide knowledge meant specifically for that person. Each year, the Crow also made offerings to the little people at Medicine Rocks, also known as Castle Rocks, where they believed some of these beings lived. These offerings were acts of both respect and necessity, meant to maintain balance and avoid drawing their attention in a harmful way. Lone members of the Crow would sometimes go to the Medicine Rocks in hopes of having a little person impart wisdom upon them. It is said during such time, the little people might manifest as a lone animal. The little people were also integral to the Crow practice of the sun dance. They were believed to be the spiritual owners of any sun dance lodge that was built, watching over the ceremony and judging the sincerity of those who participated. Only those considered genuine were granted visions or insight, and even a dancer's place within the ceremony was said to be determined by the little people themselves. Medicine Rocks, now preserved as Medicine Rocks State Park, holds deep cultural and spiritual significance tied to these beliefs. Located in eastern Montana, this landscape is defined by unusual sandstone formations that rise from the plains like natural towers, arches, and hollowed structures. The rocks appear almost sculpted, with openings, ridges, and textures that resemble weathered architecture, hence the name Castle Rocks. For the Crow and other indigenous groups, this place was not just visually striking, it was spiritually active. It was recognized as a site where visions could occur, where individuals would go to fast, pray, and seek guidance. The Crow also made fasting beds out of rocks, on which they would lie down while seeking visions and dreams. The formations themselves created natural enclosures and quiet spaces, amplifying the sense of isolation and focus needed for spiritual encounters. Because of this, Medicine Rocks became known as a place where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds are thinner. Now here's a story I found on Reddit that piqued my interest and also involves the moon-eyed people the Cherokee speak of, whom I talked about many nights ago, that are described as being little people, short in stature, flat-faced, beard, with pale white skin, and big blue eyes. Their eyes so blue and so extremely sensitive to light that they were biologically rendered to beings nocturnal and only coming out at night, yet even then, they were unable to see during certain nights, such as that of the full moon, due to the brightness of the moon in particular phases. They were said to be a mound-dwelling people, and by some accounts a subterranean race, who fallen tears would turn into cross-shaped stones. The Cherokee did not view the moon-eyed people as gods, nor spirits, or supernatural by any means, but as human. This story, however, goes as follows.
I am a Lakota man living in South Dakota. I have heard several variations of creation and emergent stories of our people over the years. I want to share a couple variations. The first I heard from my aunt about Wind Cave in the sacred Black Hills. It is one of the longest caves in the world, and its full extent has not yet been discovered. Humans were originally subterranean people. They were not the common modern people we are now. One day, Iktomi, a trickster being, went into Wind Cave to find the people living there. He convinced Tokahe, a leader of the people, to go to the surface of the earth. He saw the surface was beautiful and returned to his people underground. He was only able to talk some of the people to return with him to the surface. When they arrived, they found life to be difficult, but they persevered and became modern humans. The subterranean humans still live in the caves, but they do not look or act like us. The other variation I've heard came from my mother, and I think people here will find this more relevant. Lakota is a Siouan language. If you look at a map, you'll see that most Siouan-speaking people live around the Dakotas. But there are also groups living in the Appalachian Mountains, Those people still live in North Carolina and speak Siouan. In their history, if I remember correctly, they call themselves the people descended from the shooting star, a meteorite that came down and broke up, but also was able to create a lake that they now live on. My mother told me that half the tribe decided to enter a cave system in the Appalachians. I don't recall why. The other half remained in North Carolina. After years of travel underground, they ended up settling under the Black Hills. The emergence story picks back up. A group of them decided to ascend to the surface to live. Presumably, some humans remained to live in the caves permanently.
Another commenter noted that they remember hearing as a kid that some of the Ojibwe people of northern Wisconsin and Anishinaabe of southern Ontario have a similar tale of when the Kitchi Manitou saw that men were becoming selfish and evil. He sent a great rain and all of the good people fled into the caves and the evil were drowned. They said that it was only the swimming and flying creatures that escaped entirely. Wanabushu, the trickster deity, found a log and paddled about, rounding up the survivors. But there was no land left to live on, so various animals attempted to build land from the mud under the water, but only one, the muskrat, succeeded. They built an island on Turtle's Back for the people to live on, and when they did, Wanabushu went back and found the people and brought them up out of a hole in the earth to live on the new land. They noted how the Ojibwe people also have an oral tradition of dealing with troublesome vanishing little people of the woods called the Bagwaji Winnie, or now what are commonly called Pukwudgies. So seems like these little people, some of them once lived as regular humans atop the surface before going beneath the surface for what is described as what we call the Great Flood. Now, about Wind Cave. Wind Cave, located in Wind Cave National Park in South Dakota, is one of the world's longest and most complex cave systems, with over 167 to 168 miles, approximately 270 kilometers of surveyed passage as of early 2026. It is currently ranked as the 6th longest cave in the world and the 3rd longest in the United States. However, they are still surveying Wind Cave, so its ranking and known mileage is expected to increase with progress. Many researchers believe that what they have found so far is only 5 to 10% of the cave. It is a breathing cave, named for strong wind currents that blow in or out of the entrance, equalizing the air pressure with the outside atmosphere. Winds often rush in or out at 25 to 30 plus miles per hour during regular barometric pressure changes. However, recorded speeds at the natural entrance have reached over 70 miles per hour. Which reminds me of the tales of the little people and other entities said to dwell in the blowing caves of Cushman in Independence County, Arkansas, in the Ozarks mountain region of the Appalachia. The story associated with the blowing caves of the Ozarks is that beneath its unassuming facade lies an enigmatic secret, an intricate subterranean labyrinth that cradles the abodes of a fabled civilization. Whispers speak of the fathomless blowing caves, a subterranean network that shelters a mystifying race, towering at a ghastly height of 7 to 8 feet. Their haunting moniker, the Blue People, draws from their aberrant skin hue that defies nature's palette, and assumably they could be humans whose hue has changed due to dwelling underground. In the tapes where I discussed the blowing caves of the Ozarks in my Appalachia After Dark series, I did note that in 1781, French military officer and explorer Leclerc Milford led hundreds of Creek Indians through a series of caverns near the Red River, which passes through Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas. The Creek had told Milford that their ancestors had once emerged from the center of the earth to the surface from this same cavern, a narrative that is shared amongst many indigenous worldwide. Milford himself noted that these caverns could easily contain between 15,000 to 20,000 families. These are the type of numbers that make large societies, and this is just the part of the cave he saw. Imagine what he had not seen and the vast spaces there and potential inhabitants thereof. It is not far-fetched then to believe caves can hold entire civilizations that we know nothing about. Nodding to the Lacerda files, these cave dwellers and inner earthlings are said to know how to navigate deep into these caves and to have even carved out portions of these caves, whereas us avid cave explorers may either miss or out of precaution avoid certain paths, not to mention avoiding underground rivers. But there are also some that may have indeed found these entrances. And these are the ones who may also perhaps be documented today as missing persons. Either that, or they unfortunately met an untimely death. Add details like how right next door the Choctaw people of Mississippi also have a myth of underground origins. They believe that their ancestors emerged from the Nani Waya cave mound, a 50-foot tall natural geological formation which is hidden in a swampy forest area, approximately a mile and a half east of a better-known artificial mound and tourist site. The hill has several natural openings, some of which have been sealed up. The Park Service seems to have no good explanation for this, and it is said by the Choctaw to be the entrance to a vast underground realm. All that taken into consideration and connected with the story of the Lakota people of how they are connected to Appalachian indigenous by way of ancestors who entered Wind Cave and navigated all the way to Appalachia, and that's how they ended up where they are now, and why they speak the same tongue despite their distances being so vastly apart. So on does in fact refer to a large family of Native American languages and the peoples who speak them, historically ranging from the Great Plains to the southeastern U.S. and parts of Canada. Known for a complex polysynthetic structure, this group includes tribes like the Dakota, Crow, Omaha, and Waccamaw. It also reminds me of the Hopi indigenous of northeastern Arizona, who tell of a similar underground dwelling and navigation story, but they were assisted by the Anu Simon, the ant people, before a world catastrophe. Those who returned to the surface spread out to the near ends of the lands they planted themselves in, which is how the Hopi of Arizona are connected to the Dogon of Mali in northwest Africa, and the people of Tibet in the middle of Asia. It is why they draw and etch those concentric circles many find today. It was to represent their group branching out across the world from below the world. This is perhaps a gross oversimplification of connections, but if you go all the way back, years back, on my YouTube channel, this is explained more in a video I made called Los Angeles Reptilian Underground City. It was the Hopi who told of the underground city of reptilians that lies beneath Los Angeles, though. Matter of fact, I'll upload it to this podcast by the time this tape is released for those who are interested. The point is that the Hopi claim to have navigated across oceans to other continents, all from underground. I do believe where there is smoke, there is fire. Also, given the stories presented, it's not unfeasible to surmise that although formally the Rocky Mountains and Appalachian Mountains do not connect and are distinct, it could be that they actually do connect via underground cave systems like that of the Wind Cave. We have yet to properly navigate the entirety of such systems, but if the Wind Caves connect to the Appalachian Mountains, who is to say it doesn't also extend west to connect to the Rocky Mountains as well? Furthermore, the Appalachian Mountains were said to once continuously extend all the way to Ireland in northwestern Europe. Regions such as Donegal, Connemara, and parts of County Mayo are areas that contain some of the oldest rock formations in Ireland and are direct remnants of the same mountain building events that formed the Appalachians. In Scotland, the connection becomes even more visually apparent in the Scottish Highlands, where the rugged terrain and exposed rock formations closely resemble parts of the Appalachian region, particularly areas like the Blue Ridge Mountains. Beyond Ireland and Scotland, this ancient mountain system extends into Norway and Scandinavia, the Scandinavian Mountains, parts of Greenland, and even into eastern Canada, where the Appalachian system continues northward. While science says the connecting Appalachia between the Americas and Europe were split apart and worn down over time, is that really true given how deep we know these systems extend? There are likely underwater remnants that are vast as all hell. I'm not a believer in Pangea in the sense that it is explained. I believe there was simply more land on Earth, and the lands that were lower are simply now underwater. Yes, they may be fragmented from whatever went on, as I do not totally dismiss Pangea. I just believe it did not occur as dramatically as it is depicted, and that the underwater ridge systems speak to a lot of the fluff and filler, especially where continents appear they would fit together at. Pangea is a theory after all. I am allowed to deviate a bit without totally dismissing what others considered the most plausible occurrence given the evidence they were working with. That being said, it would also allow for underground transcontinental traveling and explain the similar presences globally, as well as some of the synchronicities that appear in both lands. Outside of the obvious voyages made by earlier Europeans to the Americas centuries before Columbus that were discussed in my Appalachia After Dark tapes and the Viking artifacts and evidence found inland alongside Egyptian hieroglyphics that lend value to my Tales of the Gales tapes and how they might migrated from Scythia to Egypt to surrounding the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, with the exception of Egypt, and then the group of them in the Iberian Peninsula settled the British Isles, more commonly Ireland. These people were the sea peoples that there's this mass hysteria of mystery about, despite the obviousness of what occurred, and the names of the cities of some of the British Isles that resembled the sea peoples' tribes, and how they were a part of the Vikings, obviously, which now they say they found to be true, but obviously the transition from being the sea peoples to Vikings was sitting right there in their face. But whatever. Not all of the sea peoples went to the British Isles, but a great deal of them definitely did. It's not that big of a mystery, to be honest. It's kind of right there in your face and being ignored by professionals almost seemingly willfully. But anyways, my point is that there is still more to be discovered surrounding the extent of such underground systems given their terrain, depth, and overall nature. The Rockies and Appalachian Mountains are plausibly connected in such a train of thought, just something to ponder on. Another commonality about the little people across the American indigenous is the test they present. Some of them are said to bring young boys who play in the forest to their homes, which are in caves. It is then that other tall and very much older creatures appear and offer the boy a choice of 3 gifts. The first gift is a knife, the second being poisonous herbs, and the third being good herbs. If the boy chooses the knife, he will become a bad man and a killer. If he chooses the bad herbs, he will not be able to heal anyone, but if he chooses the good herbs, he will become a healer. Apparently, the boy will then be kept for 3 nights before being returned to his home, and he never speaks on his whereabouts. These little people are said to be helpers to the healers when they become older. One of the most fascinating aspects of Wind Cave is its boxwork formations. Boxwork consists of thin, blade-like fins of calcite that intersect at various angles, forming geometric patterns that resemble a lattice or the framework of a box. These structures do not form in the same way as more familiar cave features. Instead of building downward or upward from dripping water, boxwork forms as minerals fill cracks in the rock. Over time, the surrounding softer material erodes away, leaving behind the calcite framework. The result is a 3-dimensional network of sharp-edged shapes that appear almost artificial in their precision. Closely related to boxwork are the honeycomb formations found throughout the cave. These patterns resemble the cells of a beehive, with tightly packed, repeating geometric shapes covering sections of the cave walls. Like boxwork, honeycomb structures are created through differential erosion, where certain mineral deposits resist weathering more effectively than the surrounding rock. The visual effect is both organic and structured, creating surfaces that look patterned rather than random. Wind Cave contains one of the largest known concentrations of boxwork in the world. It is estimated that over 95% of all known boxwork formations are located within this single cave system. This makes Wind Cave not just notable, but globally significant in terms of geological study. The surrounding landscape of the Black Hills adds another layer to the cave's uniqueness. Unlike the flat plains that dominate much of South Dakota, the Black Hills rise sharply, forming a forested and rugged region that stands out against the surrounding terrain. This contrast creates the conditions necessary for caves like Wind Cave to form, with layers of limestone and other rock types providing the foundation for its complex internal structures. Another interesting aspect of Wind Cave is the relative scarcity of the formations commonly associated with caves. Stalactites and stalagmites do exist within the system, but they are not the dominant feature. Instead, the cave's identity is defined by its boxwork and honeycomb patterns, giving it a distinct visual character compared to more well-known caves. The preservation of these formations is also notable because boxwork structures are thin and fragile. They can be easily damaged. The fact that such a large concentration exists in Wind Cave suggests that the cave environment has remained relatively stable over long periods of time, allowing these delicate features to persist. Sounds like echoes of the hollow earth theory to me and the honeycomb structure that lies within it. Another interesting tidbit is that Wind Cave is the first cave to be designated a national park anywhere in the world. It was the 6th national park in the U.S., established on January 3, 1903 by President Theodore Roosevelt. It is 2 parks in one, the park on the surface and the world below it. To many, it seems as though the government has never seemed to care about preservation of natural resources without an alternate reason to. Some conspiracists wonder Theodore's plight to preserve 297,000 miles of land, which would almost accumulate to the size of Texas and represent 8.5% of the U.S. territory. Conclusions draw to self-preservation as the reason behind natural preservation. A contract made to continue colonization in the same way the Tuatha De Danann made a contract with the Milesians to dwell beneath the surface, while the Milesians took the surface. It is not out of the realm of possibility. Roughly 120 to 160 miles, or about 193 to 257 kilometers south of Crow Country, stretching across the Yellowstone River Valley and the Bighorn Mountains of Montana and northern Wyoming, lies the remote and rugged terrain of the San Pedro Mountains in Carbon County, Wyoming. It is within this landscape, isolated and largely untouched, that one of the most debated discoveries tied to Little People lore in North America was made. The San Pedro Mountains sit within central Wyoming, a region defined by dry basins, rolling high plains, and scattered mountain ranges that rise abruptly from otherwise open land. Unlike the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, this environment is more exposed, marked by sagebrush, rocky outcrops, and wide, uninterrupted views. The terrain is harsh, with extreme temperature shifts, limited water sources, and long stretches of uninhabited land. Caves and rock formations cut into these mountains, creating natural shelters that have preserved materials for centuries. It was in one of these sealed spaces that the mummy was found. In 1936, two gold prospectors, Cecil Main and Frank Carr, were working in the San Pedro Mountains when they blasted open a section of rock and revealed a small hidden chamber. Inside, on a ledge within the cave, they discovered a mummified body seated upright. The figure was extremely small, only about 6 to 7 inches tall in its seated position, with an estimated standing height of around 14 to 17 inches. It weighed roughly 1 pound. The body appeared almost human, yet its proportions were unusual. It had a flattened skull, pronounced facial features, and what appeared to be a full set of teeth, giving it the appearance of a miniature adult rather than an infant. The position of the body added to the mystery. It was found sitting upright with its arms wrapped around its legs, as if intentionally placed rather than randomly buried. The cave itself was sealed, suggesting that the body had remained undisturbed for a significant period of time. Following its discovery, the mummy, later nicknamed Pedro, did not enter a formal scientific institution. Instead, it circulated through private ownership and public display. It was exhibited in various locations, including a drugstore in Wyoming, where it was presented as a preserved miniature human or even as evidence of a previously unknown race. Over time, it passed through several owners, including a businessman named Ivan Goodman. At some point in its later history, there are claims that the mummy was taken to Florida while under private ownership. These accounts suggest it may have been stored or shown there, though no official museum records or verified documentation confirm a formal rediscovery or exhibition in that state. After Goodman's death, the mummy effectively disappeared from public record. Its current whereabouts remain unknown, and no verified institution is known to possess it today. What makes the San Pedro mummy particularly compelling is how closely it aligns with existing indigenous accounts of small, powerful beings said to inhabit the Rocky Mountain region. Among the Shoshone, stories of the Namaragar describe a race of aggressive, small-statured people known for their strength, use of weapons, and violent tendencies. These similarities led some to interpret the mummy as physical evidence supporting long-standing oral traditions. However, scientific examination offered a different explanation. X-rays and later analyses concluded that the mummy was most likely the body of a Native American infant born with anencephaly, a severe developmental condition that results in an abnormal skull shape. This condition can give the appearance of a miniature adult, particularly when combined with natural mummification processes that preserve the body in an unusual state. Despite this conclusion, the debate surrounding the mummy has never fully disappeared. Part of the reason lies in the context of its discovery. The location itself, a sealed cave in a remote mountain range, contributes to the sense that the find exists at the intersection of natural occurrence and cultural interpretation. The positioning of the body, its preservation, and its resemblance to described beings all continue to fuel speculation. The landscape of the San Pedro Mountains plays an important role in this narrative. This region is not densely densely populated and remains, even today, relatively isolated. The openness of the plains combined with the sudden rise of rocky terrain creates a space where visibility is both expansive and deceptive. Distances can be misleading, and the lack of landmarks can make navigation difficult. In such an environment, stories tied to the land often take on additional weight, shaped by both physical experience and cultural memory. The San Pedro Mummy stands as a rare case where physical evidence, historical record, and oral tradition intersect. On one hand, scientific analysis places it within a known biological framework. On the other, its discovery, location, physical characteristics, and movement through undocumented private ownership, possibly even across states like Florida, add layers of uncertainty that keep the discussion open. Whether understood as a medical anomaly, a misinterpreted artifact, or something that sits between explanation and belief, the San Pedro Mountain Mummy continues to occupy a unique position in American history. It is not simply a discovery, but a point of convergence, linking geography, culture, and interpretation across a landscape that stretches for hundreds of miles. And much like the story surrounding it, the full truth of what was found in that cave and where it ultimately ended up remains just out of reach. The Shoshone people are an indigenous group of the Great Basin and Rocky Mountain regions of North America. Traditionally, their homeland stretched across what is now Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and Idaho, with different bands adapting to both mountain forests and desert basins. Known as skilled hunters, gatherers, and traders, the Shoshone maintained a deep spiritual connection with the land and its unseen inhabitants. Among the beings remembered in their lore are the Namaragar, the little people of the mountains. The Namaragar were said to be tiny in size, on average only about 14 inches tall, but their small stature did not make them harmless. On the contrary, they were remembered as aggressive and even cannibalistic. They attacked humans with tiny bows and poisonous arrows, and stories say they would not hesitate to kill and eat anyone who crossed their paths. Even within their own society, they were ruthless. If one of their number became too sick to contribute, the others would strike them down with a blow to the head, ending their life without ceremony. Needless to say, the Shoshone did not look kindly upon their Fey folk. Their relationship with the Namaragar was one of fear and hostility.